Good morning. Let me invite you to grab your Bibles with me and turn to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3, we are in a series called Portraits of Christ, and the whole premise behind that is to work our way through the Bible from beginning to end. Not all of it, but we'll begin to move more quickly here in the coming weeks, but we are stopping off at various points in the scriptures to make sure that we, when we think of Jesus, see Jesus, sing to Jesus, pray to Jesus, that we are actually putting before our minds the biblical Jesus. And so hence the idea of portraits of Christ. How is it that the Bible sketches him out from beginning to end? And so this morning we turn our attention to Genesis chapter 3 and primarily verse 15, where God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Let's ask for the Lord's help as we look into his word. Father, we say it so often, yet it remains so true. If you do not show up here and do something of value, nothing of any value will happen. God, we are unable to conjure up within ourselves change. God, we will not hear your voice unless you unstop our ears. Our hearts will not be moved unless you soften them. We will not stand in awe of your majesty, glory, sovereignty, wisdom, unless you move us in that way. And so, Father, we are praying that you would come and do that. I do pray that these brothers and sisters would pray this with me, that you would come and move like that you would remove from us any hunger for anything that is not you, that you would take from our minds any thoughts, any distractions this morning that are not of you, that we would not be content to sit here and let these moments pass by without seeing you and hearing you. So would you come and do that in this room among your people for your glory? We pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen. The context of Genesis chapter 3, as you know by now if you've been here, is Adam and Eve are put into the garden and they sin and they run and hide from God. That was last week. And then God comes down into the garden to give some bad news. And he begins with addressing the serpent who had deceived Adam and Eve. And so God begins by speaking to the serpent, which is the devil. And he says in verse 14, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go. Perhaps meaning that before this, the devil, the serpent, did not go on his belly. That's a possibility. I'll let you go think about that if you want to. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. You say, I've never seen a snake that ate dust. That's because that's figurative language. And when the Bible talks about someone eating dust, the idea is abject shame and humiliation. Abject shame and humiliation. So God pronounces that curse upon the serpent, and then he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Genesis 3:15 has been rightly called, in my estimation, the first proclamation of the gospel. The very first proclamation of the gospel. This is the very first time where God articulates his plan to reverse the curse of what Adam and Eve brought into the world. And you'll notice that God actually gives here the good news before he even gives the bad news. He hasn't even talked to Adam and Eve yet. He's about to, and that's bad news coming. But before God even pronounces judgment upon humanity, he gives hope. And the hope is that there is going to come one who will crush the head of the serpent. I want us to look at this text in these under these three headings, if you will. A war, a hero, and a victory. A war, a hero, and a victory. First, war. I will put enmity. That word enmity is not a word we use very often. The word means conflict or a feud, or I think the best translation, war. I will put enmity. There will be war. Now, the reason that we do not understand the Old Testament like we should is because we have not thought out Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. It is perhaps one of the most significant verses in the Bible because it actually tells you how to read the rest of the Bible. And as you read the rest of the Bible, you are supposed to be seeing that there is war between, you'll notice, between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. Offspring could also be rendered seed. Between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. There is a thread that goes all the way through the Bible, even up to our present day, of war and conflict. You see this in chapter 4 and verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. And this is what she said, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Now, do you know what's going on there? What's going on there is Eve is remembering back to the fact that there is going to be a seed coming from her line that will one day triumph over the seed of the serpent. And so she sees, and it seems as though in the original language it's clear that she's thinking that Cain is going to be it. The Lord gives her offspring in her mind, and this offspring in her mind is going to be the one to triumph over the serpent. Except for, of course, Cain kills Abel. And you're not supposed to only notice that Cain killed Abel, but you're also supposed to read that in light of the war that God said is going to come about. And so Cain kills Abel. But then in chapter 4 and verse 25, we read this. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has anointed me for another, what's that word? Okay. So I'm in chapter 4 and verse 25. We'll try this again. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another, what's that word? Offspring, another seed, instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. And so what you end up with right out of the gate, and you have to watch for this, what you end up with right out of the gate is you have this war between two sets of offspring, between two lines. The seed coming from the woman and the offspring of the serpent. And the idea is that the enmity, the war, the feud, the conflict starts right in the very beginning and is meant to be traced out in our minds. Because what God is going to do is he's going to take the line of Seth, the seed of Seth, and through that line, God is going to begin to draw people to himself. They are going to call upon his name. And so Seth is this line of the woman that the serpent means to have war with, make war with, triumph over. And so you keep reading, and the earth goes really bad, but there's this guy named Noah. And God regrets that he has made the world. We'll be here next week. And so he puts his favor, his grace upon a man named Noah, and he kills everybody else. But in that, we're keeping hold of the seed. So the serpent is triumphing over all the other offspring, but God continues this line through Noah, and then through Abraham, and then through Isaac. And you can trace out the conflict, the war, all the way along. You'll remember that Esau plots to kill Jacob after Jacob tricks Esau. And that's the serpent warring against the seed of the woman. You'll remember that Pharaoh down in Egypt means to kill all of the male babies. And that's how Moses ends up in raft in a river and then found and ends up in Egypt. You'll remember that after that, Pharaoh then tries to exterminate all of Israel in the wilderness, but God triumphs over him. And as you're reading all of this, you're not supposed to disconnect all these stories and go, oh, that's cute. You're supposed to see within these stories, God, from Genesis 3:15 on, that there's this enmity, there's war between the seed of the woman, the line of the woman, and the serpent. You keep on reading and you run into this young man named David, and you'll recall that Saul is bent on killing David, but isn't able to. That's conflict. That's war. You'll read in Esther how Haman plots to kill all of the Jews, thus exterminating the offspring of the woman, yet he fails. You'll remember that Herod kills all of the babies in the region trying to get Jesus. You'll remember that Satan tempts Jesus in the wilderness. You'll remember that the Pharisees, after Jesus preaches from Isaiah, the Pharisees take him outside of the city to throw him off of a cliff. And in all of this, you are supposed to see that there is war between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. Redemptive history is one of war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. War. Number 2, a hero. Every war, if it is to be won, will be won by a hero. Now you need to know who the hero is not. It's not Moses. Good guy though he may have been. Hero in some sense as he leads the people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt. But as you watch him, you say to yourself, it's not him. It can't be him. He dies. It's not Samson, who is kind of a shadow of the sort of hero that we're going to need. Strong, willing to go to war, willing to crush the heads of his enemies. The Philistines, it's not him though. It's not Saul. Stands head and shoulders above everybody else. He's the kind of hero you'd be thinking. And what you have to be aware of is that the nation of Israel know Genesis 3:15. The nation of Israel is aware of this conflict, this war, and they are looking for the hero who will step in where all of the others have failed and be the thing for them that they desperately need. And so there's this sense in which every time a champion arises in the land, there's a hope in the hearts of the people. Will this be the one? It's not David, though he did crush the head of the giant. It is not David. Now ask yourself, how long do you... And we don't, of course we know who the hero is, right? Like we know that. But I almost wish, in a sense, we didn't, just for a moment, because what we take for granted as we read our way through our Old Testament, what we just take for granted, I mean, we take a lot for granted. I don't even know if we're thinking when we read the Old Testament. I don't even know if we do. We ought to. I don't even know that we do. But what you have going on here is you have this war, this conflict, and every new seed, every new generation, like out on the horizon, the people are looking for this hero. Like, where is the hero? Where is the serpent crusher? Where is the one who's going to undo all that's gone wrong? And you keep watching in successive generation after successive generation after successive generation of seed ends up being triumphed over by the serpent rather than triumphing over him. And then you come, of course, to Matthew chapter 1. And in Matthew chapter 1, you read this in verse 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. when his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Now that's really interesting. And it's really interesting for a lot of reasons. One of which is that Jesus, being born of the Holy Spirit, would not have inherited a sin nature. That's kind of important. It's also really interesting because of what comes before verse 18, which is the part that we skip. It's called a genealogy. And you know what's really interesting about the genealogy? All of the big names are in the genealogy, and then some names we don't know. But they're all in there. And when you read the genealogy, what you're supposed to see is God promising war between the offspring of the serpent and the offspring of the woman, and yet God sustaining a line or a seed through all of these broken seeds, all of these broken offsprings. And you read about Jacob, and you read about Judah, and you read about Solomon, and you read about King David, and the point is that God is sustaining the line of the woman through all of this. And then, in a most spectacular demonstration of the strangest sort of birth you could ever come across, a virgin, a woman conceives. Here's what Paul says in Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman. Now, why in the world do you think that Paul needs to tell us that when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman? Because it will be someone through the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent. And Paul wants you to read that and go, oh, I know who that is. And if you don't understand what got us here, this enmity, this conflict, this war, then when the hero finally shows up, you have all sorts of reasons to marvel at the hero, but we need to orient our marveling all the way back to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. This was God's plan all along. There is war, and there is a hero. And this hero, born of woman, born under the law, he sounds like he's going to be a serpent crusher. Which then brings us to number 3, a victory. You're in Matthew. I'd like for you to turn over to Colossians chapter 2. Now remember, the interesting line here, and I gotta clear this one up. You're turning to Colossians. I'm turning back to Genesis so I can read this to you. In Genesis chapter 3, the language is noteworthy because it reads like this. I will put enmity, war, between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. And then the language gets very interesting because it says he, meaning singular offspring. He, there will be one who comes through the offspring, through the line, through the seed. He, singular, shall bruise your head, and you, serpent, shall bruise his heel. War, hero, now victory. Colossians chapter 2, verse 15. He, that is God, disarmed the rulers and authorities, that is the devil, and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him, that's Jesus. He, God, disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in Jesus Christ. A victory. So that's the victory. Here's how it happened. Here's what happened. God, back half of verse 13, has forgiven us all our trespasses, all our sins, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside by nailing it to the cross. Now you have to really think that out as it pertains to the serpent crusher. as it pertains to the victory that God has won and how it works itself out in our lives. Because what the devil had over us is legal demands. Don't eat of that tree. The day you do, you'll die. The wages of sin is death. And we, because they ate of the tree, they are sinners, Adam and Eve, and we are all sinners in them. And so what that means is that there is a set of legal demands that God will enforce, and he must because he's just, and that the devil is well aware of. Death. And the only way that you can undo death, that is the legal demand on all of us, is by taking the record of debt that stands against us and placing it onto someone else, nailing it to the cross. But not just taking a piece of paper and nailing it to the cross, but rather taking the piece of paper, as it were, the record of debt, putting it onto Jesus and nailing him to the cross. And when that happened, Satan was disarmed, and the rulers and authorities with him, and not only disarmed, but put to open shame, because Jesus triumphed over them. So that you understand the language here, the bruising of the heel, right? The bruising of the heel is the cross. If you've ever bruised a heel before, you know that it hurts. A foot injury is not pleasant, but you can recover from a heel injury. You cannot recover from your head being crushed. So it is as though Jesus on the cross puts his heel down upon the head of the serpent, and his heel is bruised, but he deals a death blow to the serpent, a skull-crushing death blow to the serpent. Perhaps Isaiah had Genesis 3 in mind when he wrote that he was pierced for our transgressions. He was bruised, crushed for our iniquities. So Jesus was bruised. His heel was bruised. But in the bruising of his heel, he crushed the head of the serpent. Here's Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things. Now listen, so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. Now what's really interesting about that is that when you read the genealogy of Jesus Christ, when you trace out the enmity, the war between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent, the devil, you quickly, well, I don't know how quickly, it shouldn't take you terribly long to conclude that up to this point, Satan has triumphed over 100% of the seed of the woman. 100%. He's winning up to this point. And he's winning because up to this point, 100% of the seed of the woman have all died. Which is why it's so fascinating when the writer to the Hebrews says, through death, Jesus might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. See, because in all of it, right, like I think that the devil wanted Saul to actually kill David. He's a murderer from the very beginning. Murder flows from him. This is what he does. He has come to seek and to kill and to destroy. So he wants Saul, when he throws the spear at David, he wants the spear to connect. It doesn't, but that's okay. He knows he's going to get him anyway. He knows that eventually David is going to die. He knows Saul before him is going to die. He knows Moses is going to die. He knows that all of the seed of the woman, all of them are one day going to go into the ground because sin reigns in death. And death has passed to all men because all have sinned. And so while the devil certainly hates Jesus, and we know that because of the opposition that Jesus faces from Satan right out of the gate, out in the wilderness we go. And from then on, as Jesus launches into public ministry, the kingdom of darkness, like a giant tidal wave, is coming at him. In fact, after you read Luke chapter 4, it says something like this. Jesus resisted all of the temptations of the devil. And then the text says something along the lines of, so the devil left him seeking for an opportunity to return. Like he left in that moment, but he's going to come back. And the devil seems to know that all of the seed of the woman at this point have all died. And it seems as though he thinks that Jesus will be no different. And if we're honest with ourselves for a moment, he was right. Jesus dies. And so once again, the seed of the serpent triumphs over the seed of the woman. Except for that event that happened 3 days later, where through death, Jesus destroys the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. Because when Jesus rises from the grave, when he rises from the dead, he demonstrates that he is unlike the seed of the woman up to this point. And the reason he rises from the grave is because of the fact that God vindicates his son, resurrects his son. If the wages of sin is death, then everyone dies. Jesus dies not because he's paying his wages, but because he's paying our wages. And when he gets done paying our wages, God raises him from the dead, which is the just and right thing for God to do because Jesus never sinned. So God vindicates his son. Jesus rolls out of the grave, and the serpent's head is crushed. But I think the tension comes in right here, doesn't it? You're like, well, Alex, I hear you, destroy the one who has the power of death, the devil, crush his head. Except for how long do you have to look in our world today? How long do you have to look around before you conclude that Satan is alive and well? Not very long. Now, I'll grant you he's alive. I'm not sure that I'll grant you that he's well. And the reason I cannot grant you that he is well, though he is alive, he is a roaring lion, he's all these things, but he's not well. And the reason he's not well is because he has a wound to his head that he will not recover from. If you've ever killed a snake, and I hope you have, when you do, they tend to flop around for a while. And that is precisely where we are right now in this moment in history. Satan is in the flopping around. He is in the throes of death, as it were. And it's really, really important that we take the rest of our time, which will not be terribly long, to think through the fact that he's in the throes of death and what all that means. Now, the one thing I did not point out in Genesis chapter 3, which I need to point out now to you, is that Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15 begins with two really interesting words. I will. I will. I will make the war between the serpent and the woman. I will make the war between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. I will put forth a hero who will come and crush the head of the serpent. I will. It is God who's going to do this. It is God who, if you want to think of it in these terms, I think you biblically can. It is God who has picked the fight with the serpent, and it is God who is certain that he will triumph. I will. I will do this. I'm going to do this. And those two words, I will, are not flyover words, because what it tells you is it tells you that this is God's grand design. He's sovereign over it. I will. I will do this. And as you read the scriptures, what you run into is a bit of a tension, because on the one hand, the devil is terrible and awful, and he does all sorts of evil and wicked things. But on the other hand, he is only ever and always underneath the sovereign I will of God. And so he is alive, but he is not well. Now I want you to think about these things with me. Two things and we're done. On the one hand, God has won. The I will has won. I will win, he has. He does that on the cross. We've seen it. God has won. And God will win forever. I've used this analogy and illustration with you before, but it is worth bringing up again. I do not do well with tension, so I don't tend tension in movies and tension in books. So what that means is I'm kind of boring to watch a movie with, because if I can't figure out how it ends, I'm going to leave and go do something else. And I don't do very well with books. I don't like reading anyway, but I don't do terribly well with books, because anytime there's a little bit of a, this is getting sketchy, I just turn to the end of the book and see how it ends, and then I'm good. You do know that while all of this death and chaos and destruction is in the world, which it is, you do know, I hope, that you can turn to the end of the book and see how it ends? Do you know that? Do you know that God has won in a very real sense? The devil has gone and gotten his head crushed. But do you know that even today in this very moment, God is going to win? He will win. You go, you move forward and launch forward, and the Apostle Paul drops this line in Romans 16, verse 20. I'll let you write that down and go read it. I'm not making this up. This is what he says. The God of peace, God will win. He will. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. To the church. He's writing to the church, and he says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Satan alive and well? Absolutely. He's alive. Is he well? Debate that. But his day is coming where God, the God of peace, is going to crush him under our feet. Under our feet. Now, when you turn all the way to the end in Revelation, you get this vision from John in chapter 1 of Revelation, where he sees one who is like the Son of Man. And we know who that is. And he has this vision of Jesus. He's got this gold sash on. He's got some white hair. He's got some eyes that are on fire. He's got a double-edged sword coming out of his mouth. And you read, and you're like, that's a very interesting picture. And it is. And all of those things have their meanings. And the only one I want to focus on is that it says, before John falls on the ground as though dead for having seen Jesus, he also notices that his feet are like burnished bronze, refined in a fire. I don't know if that means that Jesus' feet are just like bronze, or if he has some bronze boots on. I'm not quite sure. But when your feet are like burnished bronze, do you know what that means? It means your heel will never be bruised again. It means that you can go stomp on all the heads of all of your enemies, and your feet will not be hurt because they're bronze now. Burnished bronze. Keep reading, get all the way over to chapter 20 of Revelation, and what you end up with is a very, very, if we're honest, anticlimactic end of the devil. He gets all of those who are going to follow him together. It's a big army. Like you're reading this thing. John says it's like more than the sand of the shore, or something like that. So you're like, oh, this is going to be a throwdown. And the army lines up to war against, for the final battle, against the one who rides a white horse and has feet like burnished bronze, and they don't even get into it. Fire falls from heaven, destroys all of the enemies, and then that ancient serpent gets thrown into the lake of fire, where he's held forever and ever. He will win. Now, what's crazy about that is he will win, but there's a sense in which, I think in the infinite wisdom of God, he's going to win, and there's a sense in which he's going to use us to win. That's essentially what Romans 16 is saying. God is going to triumph over the devil and put him under our feet. Our feet. So the devil gets thrown out of heaven because the devil wants a share in, he wants equality with God. He wants a share of God's glory. So he gets thrown out. Because God says, you can behold my glory, but you don't get to have it. You don't get a piece. It's not a pie chart and you get some of it. So the devil's thrown out of heaven. We don't know a ton about that, but that's how that goes. Somewhere previous to Genesis 3, he's thrown out of heaven. Comes down into the garden. He hates God. He can't get at God because he's been thrown out of heaven. So what he does instead is he comes down to go at God's image bearers, Adam and Eve. He can't get at God, but he can get at them, and he does get at them. But what's really, really interesting to think through is the fact that Satan wanted God's glory because he hates God's glory, so he goes after God's image bearers. And he thinks he wins for a really long time, like just win. Because death. Until he runs into another death that then 3 days later gives way to a resurrection. And that resurrection changes the course of everything because it redeems, by that blood shed in that resurrection, it redeems all of those who were looking to God by faith in the past, like the Old Testament, and it redeems all those future from that event who will look to God by faith. So now the devil has been defeated in that sense on the cross. But his day is coming where he will once and for all be defeated. But I said God is going to win, but God's going to win forever. And the reason I said forever is because God, when he throws the serpent into the lake of fire, he's going to keep him there forever. And the devil will have an eternal knowledge of the fact that the image bearers that he used to get at God with were then later redeemed by God, more specifically Jesus, and then actually go to war with Jesus at the end of time to then triumph over the serpent under their own feet. And God does that. So, what that means is that God is going to get more glory, which Satan hates. God will get more glory, which Satan hates. For Satan trying to steal God's glory however long ago it was. God will get more glory for that. God will get more glory for that, from that. Which is why when we're in heaven, singing "Worthy is the Lamb," and we see his heel-bruising scars, hands, feet, we do not see the scars and see loss. We see the scars and we see victory, and we sing victory. And Jesus, for all eternity future, hears the praises of the saints saying, "Worthy is the Lamb, glory to God in the highest." And Satan is around for all of eternity hearing that, or at least being aware of. I don't know if he'll be able to hear it, but being aware of that reality. God will win, will triumph over him forever. The final thing that needs to be said is this. The only way in which you participate in that victory is by faith. Faith. The only way that you participate in that victory is faith. The only way that you take a part in that victory is faith. Which is why you must place your faith and trust into Jesus Christ. When you do that, you take a share or a part of his victory. Now we talked about this in the first week on this. We all died in Adam, and we can all be made alive in Jesus Christ. And that idea is a little bit foreign to us. Just like the idea of how is it that God is going to triumph over the devil and put him under our feet. How does that work? It works by faith. If you're in Christ, then when Christ triumphs over the devil, you will triumph over the devil as well. If you're not in Christ, then the devil will triumph over you. If you're in Christ, then when you die, it seems as though the devil has won, but to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. If you're not in Christ when you die, then you spend eternity apart from the love of God in the lake of fire. And so if you mean to triumph over the devil, and if you mean to triumph over death, then you must place your faith and trust into the serpent-crusher. If you mean to triumph over death and the devil, you must place your faith into the one who has triumphed over death and the devil. And then when you look to him by faith because he won, we will win too. Father, we praise you for your word. We thank you for your great Son who has done this for us. God, who has won a victory that we could not win, who has slain the dragon that we could not slay, who has trampled underfoot our great enemy and will once again. And so, God, we would pray with the church throughout the ages, being aware of this great and decisive victory on the cross, we would pray with the church through the ages, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Come quickly and finish what you've started. Come quickly and redeem your bride. Come quickly and finally fling the ancient serpent into the lake of fire. Come quickly and triumph over the devil and put him under our feet as well. Come quickly and receive the eternal glory that you and you alone deserve. Come quickly and take your people into your presence forever and ever. We pray this in your name. And the church said,